Welcome to Fave podcast, episode number 23, where I interview friends and family about their lives, about their interests, and we tell some stories to each other. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by my friend Tom Marcus. Tom and I go back to Clayton High School
Yeah.
starting in 1970, so 55 years ago, and we've been friends ever
Yeah.
since. Tom, welcome to the Fave podcast.
Thank you. I hope that math is wrong because that makes me much older than I think I am, but I fear it's right.
It's a little bit sobering to realize how
Yeah.
long we've known some of these people. I had another podcast interview with a uh, schoolmate from back in my previous high school, and I realized we had met each other in junior high in 1965, so
Yeah. Yeah, no,
60
it's
years.
crazy.
So, and then I've also interviewed someone who I just met this year, so there's a
It's a
pretty
wide
good range
variety.
in there. But Tom,
But
let's start out talking about your background. When and
okay.
where were you born?
So I was born in 1953, October 1953 in St. Louis. I believe at Jewish Hospital, although I should know that for sure, but it's probably Barnes or Jewish Hospital. Um, Lived in Richmond Heights for the first 8 or 9 months of my life, which I don't remember at all, of course, and then moved to Clayton when I was 8 or 9 months, then stayed in that house until I went away to college.
And what is your ancestry?
So I'm Jewish, and so I'm on my father's side I'm Romanian, and on my mother's side Russian. And so my both of my parents were born in St. Louis. In fact, my mother was born in Clayton. My mother never lived outside of Clayton, Missouri, other
Wow.
than the 9 months when we lived in Richmond Heights.
Yeah.
And my father was from U City. So I guess ethnically I'm Russian and Romanian, and probably some other stuff too.
And what generation were your parents?
So both were born in St. Louis. I believe my mother's parents were also both born in St. Louis. My great grandmother on my mother's side came over from Russia.
Hmm.
My paternal grandfather came over from Romania. I believe my paternal grandmother was also born in St. Louis. So we were St. Louis stock for
Yeah, you
sure.
sure were.
Yeah.
Now, after you left St. Louis, where have you lived since then?
So after I graduated high school in 1971, I went to Yale College in New Haven and spent 3.5 years there. Came back to St. Louis in early 75 to spend. I spent 9 months in St. Louis to help take care of my mom, who was sick at the time. And then I moved out to Berkeley, California in August of 75 and have stayed in California ever since. And it was in Northern California. So Berkeley for 3 years, moved to San Francisco for 20 something years, then moved down the peninsula to Menlo Park, Atherton for 9 years, and then moved to South Pasadena in 2012 or 2013.
So I assume you like it in California. What was it like getting out there after having lived in St. Louis for so
Well,
long?
I do like it out here. And I really didn't, I never took to winter weather. I know there are lots of people who love snow and love cold weather and enjoy skiing and cold weather activities, and I was never one of those people. And when I left New Haven, I was sort of done with winter and sort of done with the East Coast too. I didn't know what to expect in California, but I did know that when I came out here and in January and February it was warm and beautiful. I said, "This is the place I want to be." At first, it was just weather, and then it was just the sort of natural beauty of being in California that was hard to pass up.
What's it like for you having moved from Northern California to Southern California?
Well, I like both of them. I never, there's a certain California snobbery about Southern California that
Mhm.
people in Northern California think nothing interesting or cultural or important happens in Southern California. I never had that feeling. I always thought it was nice here too. Um, I'm not working in Southern California, so I'm retired. So it's a different flow of life than I had in Northern California. So I don't have to face the traffic here every day. If I had to commute, I probably wouldn't like Southern
Yeah,
California as much as I do.
yeah.
I might enjoy the weather. I think although it isn't as beautiful in many ways as Northern California, there is still a fair amount of natural beauty very close by. And as you know, you're in Santa Barbara, and that's about an hour and a half from here. Ojai is reasonably close. If you wanted the winter, their skiing area is also very close. So there are differences, but since I never had to work down here, I don't have that same sense of the strong differences that other people might.
And where are you located in the LA area?
So now I'm in South Pasadena, which is for Southern California. This is the east side. I wasn't aware that there was sort of an east side and a west side, but the west side is the sort of the beach towns, Santa Monica,
Mhm.
Venice, places that most people think of when they think of Southern
Mhm.
California. We're about 25 miles from the beach, and we rarely get to the west side. I mean, it is a big deal to go to Santa Monica from Pasadena.
Mhm.
For us, we pack a lunch and we plan a route to go to Santa Monica, and we just don't do it that often.
Yeah.
We stay pretty close to home.
And what's life like in South Pasadena?
So South Pasadena is a very nice suburb. It's got a good school system. It's about 25,000 people, so it's actually not unlike growing up in Clayton.
Hmm.
It's contiguous to Los Angeles. Um, it has old growth trees, and it feels where I live feels very much like how I grew up in Clayton. Um, and in fact, South Pasadena is often used as a fill-in for sort of small town USA and TV shows. And it's not unusual to see a TV shoot somewhere on the streets.
Hmm.
But then, my daughter went to the high school, public high schools here, and I really liked them and got a good education. And so it feels very familiar to be here.
When you were growing up, who was in your family?
So I have one older sister, 20 months older, who now
Wow.
lives in the Washington, D.C. area. And of course, my parents. And because they were also from St. Louis, we had all of my aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins were also in St. Louis. And so the extended family was my mother had one sister and my father had a brother and a sister. And so I had cousins on both sides. And it was but one older sister, and then I'm sure we'll get to this later, but my mom passed away in 1977. My dad remarried a couple of years later, and so I had a step family as of 1978, all of whom are from St. Louis as well, and two of whom still live in St. Louis. And I've been close to them over the years as well.
What did your parents do?
So my dad was an independent real estate broker, and he also when I was 5 or 6 years old, he started building a bowling alley. Bowling was the craze back then in the late 50s, early 60s. He built a bowling alley in Cahokia, Illinois. And I remember I'd go over there on the weekends. My dad would take me over to hang out at the bowling alley, which my mother didn't really like, but we did. My sister and I did that anyway. And that the bowling alley was sort of his full-time job for I want to say 6 or 7 years, and then bowling sort of took a turn for the worse. It got oversaturated, and so that ended up going south. And then he was basically a commercial real estate broker who did deals in St. Louis. And
And
my
your
mom didn't
mom?
work. My mom didn't work. She stayed at home for a brief time. She worked at the high school when I think my sister was out of high school, and I think it was my junior year that she worked in the little store in the high school where you would buy school supplies. And that lasted about 2 or 3 months. And I think she just either got bored or just wasn't worth getting out of the house for that. And so, but she didn't work during my childhood.
When you were in school, what did you like to do?
So it, I want to say I studied, but I don't think I did in elementary school. I liked sports and was, liked to play baseball and, sort of took up tennis in fourth or fifth grade. Um, I remember being a fairly avid reader early on, and then somehow that's fallen off over the years. My sister is still an incredibly active reader, or reads all the time. And so I read a lot. I probably watched more TV than I should have, which is absolutely true today, but I think it was also true when I was 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
Um, but I just my when I think of my sort of elementary school years, I think of playing sports with my friends, playing baseball with my friends, hit the bat in the driveway or whatever else we used to do. And it was but that I remember being fairly active, and I may be romanticizing it a bit, but that's my memory.
Now, you also went to a couple different schools. Which one
Yeah.
did you go to?
So I went to Merrimack Elementary School from pre-kindergarten to fifth grade, and then 2 weeks into the start of fifth grade, I was accepted at a country day school, what's now MICDS. And so I left Merrimack 2 weeks into fifth grade to go to country day, where I went for fifth to eighth grade. And then after eighth grade, my parents pulled me out of country day and put me back in Clayton. And so I went to high school at Clayton High School and was
What
there
was
for
it
four
like
years.
being pulled out of Clayton and to go to Country Day?
Yeah, it's a good question. At the time, I was happy. Interesting. I remember applying to Country Day and wanting to go there because I went to Camp Deerfield in second, third, and fourth grade, which was the day camp for Country Day school.
Hmm.
And the campus at the time was amazing, and now I think it's spectacular. But I just remember sort of thinking, this seems cool. There's lots of sports fields, and my parents knew that Country Day was a very good school academically, and so I took the test, didn't get in initially, and then for whatever reason, after a week or two of school, maybe somebody in fifth grade didn't come or dropped out or whatever. I was first on the waiting list, so I got the call. And I do remember it was hard to leave my friends at Merrimack. Um, Although I also remember that this new kid had started in fifth grade, Nick Adzik, and he was a better athlete than I was. And it turned out he was really smart too. So I think that the net Merrimack did just fine. So I left and Nick came and was a better baseball player and I got over it eventually.
Now, what
So
activities did you do when you were at Country Day?
so Country Day required fifth graders and up until ninth grade, all the boys, it was an all boys school at the time, to play tackle football. And so I had to, as soon as I got there, we had to go to the local sporting goods store and buy all my tackle football equipment, and I wasn't quite ready for that. I remember the first day sort of going, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. Like I like sports and I like running around, but I'm wearing pads and all these people are running at me. And I I remember, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I spent 3 years playing tackle football, fifth, sixth, and seventh grade, and never once had physical contact with anybody. I could always sort of run away from the play. And there are always two or three guys who were sort of running away from the play. And I was one of them. It's like, and there were some good, big, strong athletes in that class. But sports was very big at Country Day, and that it was emphasized.
Now, what
But
led to your coming back to Clayton?
so there was a couple things, and it was my parents' decision, although I think it was the right decision. One was that Country Day was an all-boys school, and I think my parents, and I was a shy kid, and I think my parents were worried that if I stayed at Country Day, I'd literally never talk to a girl as long as I lived, and certainly not until I was 19 or 18 and went away to college, and that was number one. Number two, there was an incident in my eighth grade year that turned out it was fairly famous at the time. Three kids who were older than I was published a satire newspaper at Country Day that got those kids kicked out of school instantly. And they were all three Jewish. And there was a very strong feeling by my parents and I think others that if the kids had not been Jewish kids, they probably wouldn't have been kicked out.
Hmm.
And there was clear at the time, I didn't realize it, but that I was the victim of some anti-Semitism. There
Hmm.
weren't that many Jewish kids at Country Day then.
Okay.
I think there are now. So my parents just felt like it was time, and it was also very much a rich kids school at the time, and we just weren't rich kids.
Yeah.
And so I think my parents felt like it had run its course. My mother had gone to Clayton High School. She knew it was, and we all knew it was a great high school. And so it just seemed like the right thing to do.
So when you got back, what did you feel?
Well, I didn't feel too much like the new kid because I had all my Merrimack friends,
Yeah.
and sort of quickly got to be friends with and somehow I was able to get into honors classes. And I think because I had been at Merrimack from pre-K to five, they knew that I could probably handle the honors classes, and I'd been
Yeah.
to a good middle school. So
Yeah.
I think that an exception. My understanding was that wasn't typical, that new kids typically were not allowed to get into honors
Right.
classes.
Right.
And so I got to be friends with the honors class kids who I'm still friends with, and that sort of gave me a nice circle of friends right away.
What activities did you have at Clayton High?
I played tennis all 4 years, and that was an important part of my high school experience. I wrote for the newspaper and was the sports editor my junior year, and also was involved in student government. And I peaked in terms of my life as a whole my senior year when I was, you know, president of student council, was on the tennis team. And I think I sort of knew that this is good. Life is good. It's probably not going to get much better. And it has. But I always kid that that was the peak of my life was age 17.
Well, I met you in senior year, and I think it was
Right.
through the newspaper. I think because
Probably
you
through
were,
the newspaper.
and
Right.
I started writing for the newspaper. So there was a group of us that hung out that worked on the newspaper, and that's probably where I first met you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, we knew you were coming. I'm trying to remember who, it might have been John Landau. Is that
Yeah.
possible? That he
Yes, John knew
said,
me.
yeah, it said that Stan Garfield's coming. He's a really smart kid, a really nice guy. And so you had good press coming
Oh,
in.
that's
So
good.
that
I
helped. Yeah.
have to thank
So,
John for that
yeah,
endorsement.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
did you have any other hobbies or interests that you had outside of school?
I'm thinking mostly tennis. I did play a little bit of competitive ping pong. There were a couple of tournaments that I went to that my parents took me to. I remember at least one, I think one and maybe both of them were in St. Charles, which at the time was like going to Hawaii. I mean, St. Charles was so far away. And now I guess St. Charles is sort of
Yeah,
inner city.
moved in.
And I think one and maybe both of the tournaments, my sister and I were the only participants. And so that was, and
Did
I
you
think
win?
I won them both, although she was pretty good. I did win them both. But after the second one, I remember saying, "Do we really need to go out to St. Charles?" My sister and I can play in the basement. It just didn't seem like we had to go that far to play ping pong against each other. So,
What did you want to be when you grew up?
well, a good question. I never really had. Um, I didn't particularly want to be a lawyer, although I became one. Um, I never really had, I didn't necessarily, I didn't have any desire to be a real estate broker to sort of follow in my father's footsteps. I have to say I was pretty open. I did not have a particular desire or goal or what I wanted to be when I grew up. I could say I wanted, win Wimbledon or something, but I didn't, I knew that realistically that was pretty low odds. So I think just sort of, you know, do well and, make a good living somehow.
And you were young, you didn't want to be a fireman or an
No,
astronaut. No.
never. I don't recall that I ever had any,
Okay.
views like that.
So tell us about where you went to college.
So I went to Yale College along with. There's some controversy about this, but I think there were four of us that went to
Four.
Yale from our class, possibly a fifth, but we'll have to do some research on that. Peter Krentz, Gingy Scharf, and Becky Dirks and I all went off to Yale. And Peter and I became roommates. And Gingy, Peter, and I were all in the same residential college. Yale is the 12 and maybe now 14 residential colleges where you spend most of your time. And so I hung out with Peter. And I wasn't, Yale was going through its own transition. It was going from being an all-male, very waspy school to becoming a fully co-ed school, which it now is. Our class was 20% women, 80% men, and it was just a very difficult time for me socially. I think it was a transition time for Yale, and just it wasn't the happiest time in my life, I'll say. Although I have generally good memories, and we just had our 50th reunion, which I wasn't able to go to, but it you know I just wasn't quite ready for the sort of the crush of a East Coast school and the pressure and academically and socially.
How did you choose Yale and where else did you consider going?
Well, I chose Yale. I applied to, I want to say six or seven schools. Um, and Yale was sort of my reach school, it was my, top school that I
Yeah,
applied to.
yeah.
Um, and I'm not sure what made it stand out to me. Well, I didn't get into Harvard, so that made it easy. I didn't have a big choice, Harvard versus Yale. But even if I had had the choice, I would have gone to Yale. Easy to say that since I didn't get into Harvard. And I probably don't think I would have gone to Stanford either, although they also rejected me. So it's also easy to say that. But Yale really was, for whatever reason, it was first on my list. And my recollection was that this fellow who was a year ahead of us in high school, Luigi Attardi, no reason you would know him since you weren't there until senior year, but Luigi came back, and I remember talking to him, and he said, the best thing about Yale is they leave you alone there. which may or may not, it wasn't turned out not to be true, but it sounded good to me. And I said, okay, I think I want to be left. I don't know why, but I thought I wanted to be left alone. So I said, okay, I think I want to go there. And I also remember him saying that, he really liked it there. He became a little bit of a detour, but Luigi apparently became a fairly prominent poet. And he wrote under a pen name because I Googled him 5 or 6 years ago just out of curiosity, and he passed away. But he was a very prominent poet, and he lived in St. Louis because I believe his father, maybe both parents, were somehow affiliated with Washington U, and that was why he was in St. Louis.
Now, what did you study at Yale?
So I was a political science major. Um, I took a lot of political science and economics classes and thought about majoring in economics, but as I looked at the requirements for being an econ major, they looked much too hard. And you really had, I went, oh my God, it was a 40-page paper and independent research. And it just seemed and the political science, as I recall, and I was very interested in politics at the time and in truth. And
So, what do you think you would do then with that degree?
well, I did think I would go to law school.
Okay.
And like a lot of kids who went to law school, thought that that might somehow be an entree into politics of some sort.
Hmm.
Not so much being a politician, but working on Capitol Hill or doing something in Washington. And after my junior year in college, I worked in Washington for Senator Stuart Symington as an intern and really enjoyed that. I loved living in Washington that summer. And that was also the summer of the Watergate hearings. So everybody was very intensely political. And so my goal at the time was to go to law school and maybe come back as a Senate counsel, in a committee or a
Yeah.
subcommittee or something. I talked to a couple people
Yeah.
for whom that was a really interesting career track. And so that was really my thought after my junior year in college. And then once I got to California, I went, oh, forget that. I'm staying in California. So
Did you played ping pong, if I recall, at Yale? Can you
I
tell us
did.
about that?
I did. Well, that was going to be now that was going to be my story, but
All right. Well, we'll defer then.
okay,
I don't want
okay.
to preempt your story, so
My
we'll move on. When you graduated from Yale, then what was next?
So I graduated from Yale well, I graduated in the winter of 74. We were supposed to graduate in the spring of 75. My mom was very ill. She had ALS. So I came back to St. Louis for 9 months to sort of to help out at home. And then moved out, went to law school in the fall of 75, which was sort of the time the time I would have gone had I stayed
Yeah.
at Yale for
Yeah.
the last semester.
So you went to law school at Berkeley.
Went to law school at Berkeley. So basically went straight through college and law school. Didn't,
Okay.
took the 9 months off, but that really
All right.
it was
And
just
then
a semester.
once you got your law degree, then
Yeah.
what was your first job?
So my first job was as an associate at Heller Ehrman White and McAuliffe, which was a big San Francisco law firm at the time. It's now long gone. I will say that this is a note that every company that I ever worked for either went out of business or went bankrupt. And I'm not sure there's a direct cause and effect, but it's possible.
So the
It,
Midas in reverse thing, right?
exactly, exactly. Often long after I left, but it may have been someone went, whoops, that Marcus guy worked here a long time ago. It's time to shut the lights out.
So you
So I
were
worked,
on the partner track initially?
so I was there for 3 years. And it was a big law firm, and I was doing litigation that I really did not enjoy. And I went to a smaller firm, so I was on sort of that track, and I went to a smaller firm in 1981 or 82, I think 81, that was primarily known as an antitrust law firm because I really wanted to do antitrust law, which it was my favorite class in law school. It combined economics and law. the the theory of it is very interesting. The practice of it is really, really mundane. I mean, it is document heavy. It's very intense. To get to do interesting work there, you really do have to pay your dues for years and years and years. And finally, after 3 years at the second firm, so 6 years out of law school, maybe five, maybe adding a year somewhere, I realized that I just didn't like being a litigator. I mean, it was just this grinding, really intense, sort of confrontational type of practice that just didn't suit my personality. And frankly, I don't think I was that good at it either. I mean, there were people who just loved it and reveled in the fight. and just loved crushing their opponent. And I just never had that spirit in me. I see spirit was there. There was there it is. I thought I know I saw spirit in your shirt. Um, and so I just said, this is just not, and I also had a small trial at my second law firm. I was they let young lawyers try small cases. So I had what turned out to be a 1 day trial. I was nervous about it for weeks, beforehand. I tried the case. It was a very easy case. We won. I didn't, I did an okay job because we won, but I think anybody could have done it. But I didn't feel good about it, and I didn't feel like, oh my God, this is great. If this is fantastic, I want to keep doing this. It was like, if this is as good as it gets, I'm out of here. So I said, I really think I shouldn't be a litigator. I took a while and I looked at in-house jobs, and I ended up getting a job with a company called Bray, Brae, which also was long gone, of course, because I was there. Um, and it was a leveraged leasing company that took advantage of what was then the tax law for that allowed investment tax credits and accelerated depreciation to be used to be by certain owners. If anyone's still watching the podcast, that probably killed it. They're gone
Well, I was going to
now.
say, I'm afraid that your track record is going to be the end of the podcast as well.
That is it, right? Tom did leverage leasing, and then the four people who are watching just shut it down. And of course, the company that Bray then was then sold. So I went to work in 1985 for another equipment leasing company, which was also sold. But the tax laws also changed in 1986. So the investment tax credit and accelerated depreciation, which I understood completely, were thrown out. They weren't law anymore. So not only did my company go away, the law went away. So I was an expert in something that was completely irrelevant. Like nobody cared anymore. So I said, this is so good. And then just through contacts, through a friend of a friend, I got heard of a job at a company called Broderbund Software, and through my friends, I met with the CEO of the company, and it was a small software company up in San Rafael, Illinois. I remember having lunch with the founder, who was a few 6 or 7 years older than I was, and he said, "I'm looking for two things. I want someone who's an expert in securities law, and someone who's really technical." And I said, "Well, that's great. I am not your guy. I know nothing about securities laws. I've been a litigator, and I'm not technical at all." And he said, "Well," so we ended up having lunch. And I think, as I recall, he took me to Burger King, and we talked, and we got along really well. And he said afterwards, he said, "Well, I'll just you're probably a fast learner." And he gave me the job. So I became general counsel at Broderbund Software in October of 1986, knowing nothing about computers or securities law.
Just to clarify, that was San Rafael, California.
So San Rafael, California, yes.
Yeah, you
So,
said Illinois before, so that
oh, did I
was
say Illinois? Oh my God, I am getting old. Sorry, California, and it was 20, maybe 8 to 10 miles, I guess, north of San Francisco. I had never been there. I had no idea where it was, and to me, I was very San Francisco centric. So I was like, San Rafael, a software company. It just sounded crazy. And I went there my first day in October of 1986, wearing a blue suit, white shirt, and red tie. And I looked around, and everybody else was wearing blue jeans and looked like people hadn't, been meticulous about their grooming. And I walk in, and people sort of look at me. And my first day, somebody came in and said, "Oh, I've been waiting for the company lawyer to start." And he asked you some question about pixelated something and da da da. And I had no idea what he was talking about. He may as well have been talking in tongue. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I said, "Oh my God, I've ruined my life." Sitting here in San Rafael, California, could have been Illinois, but it was San Rafael, California, wearing a suit. No one else is wearing a suit, but I sort of stuck it out. And with the help of a couple of colleagues at Bruderbund who turned out to be good friends, I was able to stay there for 12 years.
And
And
what
that
did you
was
end up there? What role were you there at
so
the
I
end?
was general counsel the whole time, and
Okay.
the company was looking to go public, which is why they hired a general counsel, although they hired a general counsel who knew nothing about securities law. But we got very close to going public in 1987, and in fact got to within a week of going public. And then, for a variety of reasons, the deal was called off, which was not good. It turned out okay, but at the time was sort of a disaster. The company ended up going public in 1991, by which time I had learned the securities laws, which was good, and knew something about, I at least knew how to turn the computer on. I knew which button to hit to turn it on, and stayed there. And I became also head of business development, which was sort of a catch-all title for people. They wanted to give him or her some additional responsibility, and I ended up opening up the Broederbond Europe office, which was really fun and interesting. And in some ways, my sort of my most fun professional accomplishment was helping to open Broederbond Europe and hiring the team there and getting that set up.
So what came after that?
So that company was sold, of course, in 1998 because I was there, and it got sold and ended up going. It survived in very diminished state. The internet sort of came online and really took a toll on consumer, a packaged software. So after I left Broederbond, I went to work for an online advertising company called Flycast Communication, which was it was the first bubble, the 1999-2000 internet bubble. And Flycast did really well for a year, and then of course got sold. And I was able to, I got some financial remuneration for being part of the bubble, but also watched as my stock went from a high of I think 150 something, and I watched it go down to about 30 cents. And I said maybe I should have sold earlier, but like a lot of people, I thought that it would never end, and when it
Yeah,
ended, we just couldn't believe as you sort of watch the stock go down.
yeah.
You say, well, it's going to go up, it can't possibly keep going down. And it kept going down, down, down. And
Would you have been allowed to sell it earlier if you
I
wanted
would have
to?
been allowed to sell some of it,
Okay.
not all of it.
Yeah,
We were locked up because of the deal, but I
yeah,
certainly could have sold a lot more. There were people that did. I did sell some, and
yeah,
it was a perfectly good ending. But I did have colleagues who didn't sell any and had a huge tax exposure for a variety of tax reasons in dealing with options and no cash to cover it. And so at least I was able to, pay my tax bill and have some
yeah,
extra.
yeah.
But there was some, and who knows, it could happen again, and if we're in an AI bubble now. But it
Right.
just
Well, what happened after that?
so then I decided that I wanted to be a CEO. Now, I'm not sure the world was quite ready for me as a CEO, but I really wanted to see if I could do it because I did think, and partly it was because Bruderbund had brought on a really terrible CEO in 1996, and I won't mention his name, but he really was among the just awful hires, and I wish it was their business school cases, and I don't as to why this was done, but it was just a bad hire from the get-go, and he really caused the company to deteriorate quickly, and I thought I could do a better job, so I became the CEO of a small email services company called Everyone.net. And at the time, we provided outsourced email services to small companies, and you could have your own domain name, and it was an interesting little company, but it needed ad revenue to survive. And once the sort of the internet ad bubble burst, it was really hard to make a go of it. I
Yeah,
was there for 3 years, 2001 to 2004. When I came on board in 2001, again, I sort of wore my suit, and there were 27 employees, and they sort of looked at me like, who is this guy wearing a suit? And never wore a suit again. But and the people, I was sort of brought in by the venture capitalists, so I was sort of viewed as sort of a money guy and wasn't technology, which wasn't entirely untrue. But the way I got people to talk to me and to have at least a modicum of respect for me is that somebody else came up with the idea of buying a ping pong table. And I said, okay. And I remember somebody came to me and said, it would be okay if we spent $99 on a ping pong table. And the company was running out of money, but I said, yeah, we can do that. So we bought a ping pong table, and then programmers were playing, and I came in one day and I said, can I play? And they said, oh, sure, we'll let you play. And of course, I was better than all of them. And they said, wow, maybe the CEO isn't such a bad guy after all. And so I actually got street cred because of my ping pong ability. So that
Now, were
was
you
good.
ever a CFO anywhere?
I was not. The CFO reported to me at Flycast and of
Okay.
course at
So you were
everyone.net as well.
CEO, and
Yeah.
then the company burst.
Well, the company then I was there for 3 years, and the company was just it was tired. And the board member who I was pretty good friends with, we I should have known what this was coming, but on a Sunday he said, "Can you and I meet for coffee on Sunday?" And I went, "Sure." That never done that. And he said, and I went there and he said, well, I just think it's not working out with you. And I said, or we need to make a change. And I went, oh, I guess I'm being fired. And he said, yeah, I don't want to put it quite like that, but yeah. And I said, well, can I go in? I mean, that's fine. I sort of knew it was coming and it was the right decision. And I said, well, can I go in on Monday and, collect my stuff? He said, well, no, I don't think we're going to have you go in today. And I went, okay. So I went in and I took and it was very cordial.
Okay.
He was right. I mean, I was tired. Everybody was tired. And 2 years later, the company was sold.
Yeah.
And, it was,
Okay.
nobody did, it wasn't a horrible sale, but
Yeah.
it never turned into
Okay.
a big thing.
So then what happened?
Well, and then I became a sort of independent contractor and went to work with a couple of little boutique investment banks that were trying to buy and sell companies. And which I thought I could be good at, but one of the things that I've never been good at is self-marketing. And so much of what you have to do as any kind of broker is to kind of sell yourself. And I just never could do that.
Yeah.
And so I got a couple of small deals done, but nothing too dramatic. The one deal that I can tell another funny story about is the fellow who founded a company called, I want to say Odeo was the name of the company. Called me up. I don't know how he got my name, and he said, we're looking to sell as a podcast search company in 2005 or six. And he said, fine. So I talked to him and we took the assignment. And he had he said, I've got this skunk work project over here that I don't want to be part of the deal. And he described it to me, and it was Twitter. And he was the founder of Twitter. And I looked at it and I said, that's ridiculous. Nobody would ever want that. That's like the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. Nobody would want that silly little company. Of course, that won't be part of the deal. So we did end up selling Odeo
Yeah.
to real networks.
Yeah.
And he kept hold of this little stupid thing called Twitter. And Twitter eventually was sold for $56 billion. So I guess I was wrong. My judgment was
Yeah. Yeah.
wrong. So
Well, at least they didn't cause that one to go out of business.
exactly. It didn't cause Twitter to go out of business yet, although it was sold.
Yeah.
So
So eventually you ended up in the private equity world?
yeah, on the sort of the outside of it, sort of
Yeah.
as trying our best to broker deals.
Okay.
And that lasted until 2011. And then it just wasn't, my marriage had broken up. I was sort of done working, and I, I was basically then sort of more of a hired gun consultant, sort of a per hour consultant for business advice. And I had a couple of interesting assignments that I did there, but it, I sort of slid from a consultant with some clients to a consultant with fewer clients to a consultant with no clients. And then I went, oh, why don't I just say I'm retired? Like, what's the difference? And so one day I decided I'm retired.
Oh, okay. And
And
what's
so
retired life been like?
it's been good. And I, Susan and I reconnected in 2011 or 2010. She had moved from Northern California to Southern California. And so we started up a friendship, and then I came down and visited, and ultimately we started up a real relationship. And one thing led to another, and I decided to move down here to be with Susan and her daughter. So I moved down as of January 1st, 2013, and here I am.
And what are your hobbies or interests that you have?
So now I spend a fair amount of time at the gym working out, which is surprising considering I was never a workout person. I played a lot of tennis up until 3 or 4 years ago, and then my right arm finally said enough. But I wanted to stay active, and so I got a personal trainer and sort of work out a couple times a week at the gym. And try to walk at least a couple miles every day or most days. Um, Watch more TV than I want to admit, but I do watch a fair amount of TV. Still a pretty serious sports fan. I know we'll get to that in a minute. Um, but the days are, I'm not bored. I've never been bored. But I've also never been super busy in retirement. I never had to be always on the go. But so enjoying life, married with a daughter who graduated college in May, and we'll probably get to her in a couple minutes as well. So it's all been great. And
Oh, great.
yep.
All right. We're going to go to the five topics now. What do you
Okay.
like to read?
So I Good question. I probably read more stories on, on the internet than anything else. I've become sort of addicted to my phone. Um, I'll admit that I just finished the Bjorn Borg autobiography, which might have been one of the most boring books I've ever read, and among the more poorly written books I've ever read. But I just had to read it. He was just, I read a review that basically said exactly that. You
Oh,
should only read this book if you're a Bjorn Borg fan because it's not very well written and you won't learn anything.
so it was a very Bjorning book.
It was a very Bjorn thing, exactly. But I did read it. I
Okay.
now have a couple of other books, and I also, unfortunately, only read books on my phone now. I can't read a book. I can't even read on a Kindle. I have to read it on a phone. I just downloaded the new Dan Brown book, which is supposed to be pretty good. Um, but I haven't. What other books that I'm just trying to remember what would
Was
be
there
a
an
good book?
author that you like or a book that you can recommend?
Well, I did. Let's see. Yes, the answer to that is yes, but I have to remember what I had. I had an answer, but I've now forgotten it, so that's doesn't bode well for the answer. Um, hmm. I did like John Irving, who I just also has a new book. I loved The World According to Garp, uh, Prayers for Owen Meany, a couple of other Irving books that I've read that I really enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to reading this one. Um, I did read a couple of books by. Now I'm going to forget the guy who wrote. What was his name? I can't. This is
Oh, it'll come to you
terrible.
later.
It'll come to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Who wrote the book about the A's, Moneyball? Who was the Moneyball author?
Oh,
Michael Lewis.
Michael
Michael
Lewis.
Michael Lewis. I read a bunch of his books and
Okay.
liked his storytelling. He was good.
All right. Moving on to food. What do you like to eat?
So I like most food. If my favorite is still Italian, I think you introduced me many, many, many years ago to sushi, back in probably 40 years ago, and it just seemed ridiculously exotic that anybody would do this. But I now love sushi. Sushi, Italian. Those are I'd say those are my two favorite.
All right. What about Steak and Shake?
Well, funny, yes, Steak and Shake is, of course, grew up on Steak and Shake. It was my all-time favorite. I don't eat a lot of red meat now, and every once in a while, I'll allow myself to have, smash burger.
Yeah.
At, probably at, I go there's an In-N-Out fairly close by, and it's pretty good,
Yeah.
but it's not as good as Steak and Shake. Steak and Shake did open in Southern California maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I went right away, and it was really good. But I think I
It wasn't the same
it
though.
wasn't quite the same as I think
Yeah.
it had been franchised out.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
And it was still really good. And in fact, if cheeseburgers and French fries were good for you, I'd have them every day. I mean,
Yeah.
and if I'm ever going to be executed and have one last meal, that would probably be it. But I just don't eat it very much.
So if we were going to go out to eat together, where would you take me?
So we'd probably take you to sort of Susan's and my favorite restaurant in Pasadena, which is Houston's, which is a high-end chain, but really Hillstones and a couple. It had there a couple of other names. It was really good. And it's a very sort of retro chic restaurant in Pasadena, and it's impossible to get in. So we just go, wait for 2 hours and wait
Oh,
at the
okay.
bar. And it's always really
Yeah.
uniformly good. Sort of a nice sort of hearty American comfort food
Yeah.
menu. And it, it, it is sort of reverse trendy and reverse chic, but but we don't stray that far from Pasadena
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
dining.
What do you like to order at Houston's?
So normally I was ordering the French dip for a while, but now I normally just get a salad, or
Okay.
sometimes or the salmon. So it just depends on the
Okay.
mood. And it,
Moving to music, do you have a favorite song, musician, concert, or album? Or all of the above?
well, all of the above for sure. My musical tastes were really locked in high school, I think. And Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young was still, they were the best. And for years, the only records or albums or tapes that I had were somehow some derivation of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. At some point, I sort of grew past that, and I, broadened out to the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen and anybody after 1980. Forget it. My music taste stopped. Um, I will say that Susan dragged me to two Neil Diamond concerts that I went to, and Susan, who has otherwise impeccable musical taste, for whatever reason, and since she's going to be one of the few people watching this, I can say this, she dragged me to two Neil Diamond concerts, and I went, and they were much more fun than I expected.
Okay.
So,
How about a favorite album?
It would probably have to be one of the two, either the Crosby, Stills and Nash first album or Deja Vu. I think nothing has ever done better in
I
my mind.
remember though when Four-Way Street came out, you were quite excited about
Yeah,
that.
408 Street was pretty good, and then I guess that one I'd have to add that one too.
Okay. What was the first record you bought?
It's a good question. It had, I mean, of course, it was a 45.
Yeah,
Um, I want to say Breaking Up is Hard to Do by Neil
Neil
Sedaka.
Sedaka. All right.
It might have been. That's possible. Either that or I won Breaking Up is Hard to Do on KXOK's Name It and Claim It, which I did win a record. And it might have been that. It might have been Breaking Up is Hard to Do, but that was among the first, if not the
Okay.
first.
And what was the last concert you attended?
Well, Susan and I went to the Blue Note in Los Angeles, which is open in the last 3 or 4 months. And it wasn't really a concert, it was more of a jazz performance. I want to say
Yeah.
that Malachi Washington. It was really good.
Oh, great.
Um, and of course, seeing David with you at, I'm blanking out of the name of the venue, the
Oh, Herb Alpert's Club.
Pearl Albert's Club, but I should remember the name of it. Yeah. And that was really, we enjoyed that too. But we don't typically, I'm too old for concerts at this point, and there are concerts at the Rose Bowl, and I've been invited to a couple of them. And it just the idea of going to
Yeah.
a concert with 80,000 people at this point is
Yeah.
just not what I want to do.
I know you like sports. What sports
I
do you
do.
enjoy watching?
Well, now I'm watching basketball. Of course, the NBA season started, so I probably watch more basketball on TV than anything else. I used to go when I lived in the Bay Area. I went to a lot of Warriors games. Of
Hmm.
course, I moved to the Bay Area in 1975, which is when the Warriors won an NBA championship. And I'm sure we'll get to the Spirits in a minute. But so I'd probably go to 7 or 8 games a year. And then when I moved down here, and the Warriors, of course, were really good. And so I try to see the Warriors 2 or 3 times a year down here. But I went to a Warriors Clippers game a year ago or this past February at the new Intuit Dome.
Hmm.
And it was too far away and it was just too crowded. I really just the parking and getting in and getting out was just I just said, okay,
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
watching on TV now. So
Any other sports besides basketball?
basketball and baseball and football, and
Okay.
probably in that order.
Okay.
Um,
And are you strictly San Francisco guy or have you switched to LA?
well, I'm a San Francisco guy. I did switch from St. Louis sports allegiance, and I think I'm probably one of the few Cardinals fans. You grew up a Cardinal fanatic, and I was in San Francisco enough years that even without sort of being aware of it, I became more of a Giants fan than a Cardinals fan.
Hmm.
And that became especially clear, I think it was 2002. I think the Giants and Cardinals met in the National League Championship Series. And I went to the game expecting to root for the Cardinals, and I found myself rooting for the Giants. I'd become a Giants fan
Yeah.
without really
Yeah.
realizing it. And
Yeah.
so it, if I ever become a Dodgers fan, whoever's watching this, just take me out, take me to a home, just take me to Switzerland to an assisted suicide, just get rid of me. If I ever become a Dodgers or Lakers fan, it just can't happen.
Do you have a favorite athlete?
Right now, I'd have to say Steph Curry,
Okay.
but he really is just an amazing athlete and incredible role model, and everything he does is incredible, fantastic on the court. Um, Over the years, it's gone from Bob Gibson, Lou Brock, Kurt Flood, Joe Montana, Bjorn Borg, of course, whose autobiography I had. I also read Bob Gibson's autobiography a long time ago. So, um,
How about a favorite sports memory?
well, I'd have to say, not that your T-shirt was suggesting it, but probably the Spirits beating the Nets in the 1975 playoffs was, I'd have to say, that was the only one that might rival that was the Warriors We Believe team beating the Dallas Mavericks in, I want to say 98. No, might have been 98. When the Warriors were the number 8 seed and Dallas had Dirk Nowitzki and they were the top seed. And it was Baron Davis and Steven Jackson, and I forget who else was on the team. But I went to Game 6 of that series in person, and it was the most fun I've had at a sporting event. It was just,
Yeah.
of course, the Nets Spirit's final game was in New York and we were watching on TV. And so
Right.
it wasn't quite the same. But those were the two games that really stick out.
And I think you were at the game prior to that in St. Louis where they had a great battle between Dr. J and Marvin
Yep.
Barnes. Do you remember that
Yep.
game?
Absolutely. I do. I do remember.
I think
I
that was the
also,
most exhilarating game that I was
yeah.
ever at in person.
Yeah. That was right. And I also was at the Bill Walton UCLA, I think
Oh,
against Memphis State in St.
yes,
Louis.
Memphis State final in 73.
73, right. When Walton went, I think 21 for 22 from the floor.
That's right. That's
And I
right.
was at that game.
I'm surprised. I'm disappointed you didn't ask me to go with you to that game.
I think you weren't living in St.
I
Louis.
was. I
Oh,
was.
you were.
I was. And but you did get me to go with you to the 78
Oh,
Final Four.
right, right. The 78 finals. That's right.
Yeah. So
I
I
went
have
with
to
my
thank you
dad. Yeah.
for initiating me into the whole. I've now gone to, to almost 24 of those. So
That's right. You go with your son, right? You go
yeah,
to
we go
the
every
Final
year.
Four.
So
Yeah, that's great.
I
That's a
think I
great
have to owe
tradition.
you a debt of gratitude to getting me to go
Right.
to the first one.
I do remember that. I think, did we sit in the absolute top seat?
Yes. We were
Yes,
in the
that's
very last row of the old
right.
St. Louis Arena,
Right.
and we saw Duke,
Right.
Notre Dame, Kentucky, and
Wow.
Arizona, if I remember right.
Wow. Was that the Eugene Banks Duke team?
Mike Jaminski, I
Mike
think,
Cheminsky, not Gene
and
Banks. Okay. Hmm.
Goose Tatum, Jack
Wow.
Tatum,
Okay.
was the star for Kentucky, and they
Wow.
won. They won it all.
Okay. Wow.
So
I
that
don't.
was the start of the
That's
Final
funny.
Four.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to comedy. Do you have a favorite comedian?
Well, I have a number of favorite comedians, so it's hard to say who's the absolute favorite. My I remember going to my first Marx Brothers movie, probably I think it was my junior year, and just thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, and it felt like I discovered the Marx Brothers. You know. And so and and I think Woody Allen's Take the Money and Run was about that same time, 68 or 69. And so I thought that was the funniest movie I'd ever seen. And I also, Take the Money and Run, and what were his
But
other couple?
Bananas was the next one.
Bananas and Sleeper. I mean,
Yeah,
they were the funniest movies
yeah,
ever.
yeah.
And then I got to college, and my college roommate introduced me to Monty Python, and I thought they were the funniest. They were hilarious, and I'm
Yeah.
still, most of my sense of humor comes from Woody Allen and or the Marx Brothers at some point. Some level of self-deprecation
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
from them,
I
and
know I can count on you if I make a Monty Python reference in one of my pictures
yeah.
that you'll get it.
I usually will get it. And there are a handful of us. I mean, it's funny to this day. It really is.
It is.
They were amazing. I think I still think that Annie Hall was the best movie I've ever seen, and Annie Hall and Casablanca. Um, I think Woody Allen probably peaked at Annie Hall.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Um, I haven't.
Do you have a favorite scene in Annie Hall?
The most memorable scene was the split screen when Woody Allen and Diane Keaton are in therapy,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
therapist asks them both, how often do you have sex? And Woody Allen says, almost never, 3 times a week. And Diane Keaton says, all the time, 3 times a week. I just thought that was genius.
there's also
And
the
the
split
Marshall
screen.
McLuhan scene is
Yes, the
also
Marshall
really,
McLuhan scene I
McLuhan
think
scene
is
is a
my
classic.
favorite, but
Yeah.
but the split screen between the two families, Diane
Yes.
Keaton's and
Yes.
Woody Allen, that's a pretty
Yes.
good one too.
Yes.
The dialogue he gives the Jewish family there
Yes.
is
Yeah.
pretty
No, it was
priceless.
genius. It was genius for sure.
All right, last question is about who is best at making you laugh and who are you able to crack up?
Well, now uh, Susan makes me laugh, and I think I make her laugh too. We have to say we do laugh with each other, not that often at each other, but we do. We're able to make each other laugh. I have other friends, yourself included, who make me laugh, and it's a good thing. Um, I think I've always been able to make other people laugh. It's sort of but as you said, I can't tell a joke. That isn't part of that's not that. But humor has always been an important part of sort of my persona, I think.
It has. I
Yeah.
think of you that in that context, and I think of you as telling me stories that make me laugh that I have retold many times to many people over many years.
Oh, good. I hope some of them are true. I make things up from time to time, but
All right, time for a story. What are you going to tell us about?
I was going to tell the story of how the highlight of my athletic career, which was playing ping pong at Yale, and sort of how that came about. Um, you may remember back I think in the spring of 71, the United States table tennis team went to China, what was then Red China, and the United States didn't acknowledge the existence of China. We obviously recognized Taiwan, but not China, and literally it just didn't exist. And so there was something going on behind the scenes. The U.S. team went to China. Ping pong became very popular and very topical. And so when I went to Yale, as a freshman, there was a sign up posted somewhere that said tryout for or the Yale table tennis team is looking for tryouts. And I figured even though I was sort of the best player in the St. Louis basements, I figured I can't do this. And so I think Gingy said, "Oh, you should try." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I trudged to the gym on a weeknight with my little ping pong paddle. And I go up to the fifth floor of the gym, and there was a half basketball court with 5 or 6 tables and people playing ping pong, and a lot of people there. And I sort of look around and didn't know anybody. And there was a fellow standing by a table. It was the only table where no one was playing. And so I said, "Do you want to play?" And so he said yes. And he was Asian, which is important only because I hadn't really had connection with many Asian folks growing up in St. Louis. And so we played, and we played a couple games, and he was pretty good. And we played close games. And then I noticed people sort of coming to the table to watch us play. And by the time we finished, there were maybe basically all the other games had stopped and everybody was watching us. And I won. And so somebody came up to me and said, "Do you know who that was?" And I went, "No idea." So it was Don Chong. I said, "I don't know who that is." And he said, "He's the number one player." And I said, "Well, I don't know what to say. I just beat him." So I said, "I guess you're the number one player." And so the coach, the guy, I guess he was the coach, came up to me and he sort of said, "I think you should play on this team." And I said, "Fine, I'm happy to." And I played on the team. The coach didn't like my style because it was very unorthodox and very idiosyncratic, but I wasn't going to change it.
Didn't
I
he
was
tell you to change your grip?
well, he told me to change everything about my game, basically. And I said, "No, I'm 17 years old. I'm too smart. I know everything." And I just wouldn't, but I beat everybody. And
Yeah.
so, but I will say that we played either 7 or 8 matches against other schools and other organizations. And I lost every single one of them. So, most of them I lost pretty handily. I played my worst defeat was against, I want to say her, Alice Green, who at the time was the number 3 or 4 ranked woman player in the country. And she was a junior at Barnard in Columbia. And we played, and I think she beat 21-2, 21-3, 21-4, whatever. And at one point I said to her, "Can you at least make me look?" I mean, she was really nice, and she could tell that it just wasn't going to be a competitive match. And she was
Yeah.
very. I said, "Can you let me win a couple more points in the next game?" And she did. I think it was 21-8, and but she controlled every point. I played a guy from the United Nations who had one arm, and he was so good. He was so fast, but and I lost. But it was fun. I had a good time. And then Yale built indoor tennis courts my sophomore year, so I stopped playing ping pong. I just played
Uh-huh.
tennis. And I think the interest in ping pong waned a little bit.
Okay.
And there is now a very active Yale table tennis team. At least I'm on their
Huh?
Facebook page and
Okay.
I'm a member, and it's
Okay.
funny to see the good players.
Now, the tennis, did you play competitive tennis or was it?
I was sort of at the tail end of the team, and Yale didn't
Mm,
really recruit and didn't have a
okay.
good tennis team at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So I was able to be sort of like the 20th person on the
Okay.
team. The top 4 or 5 players were really
Yeah.
good, and I
Yeah.
wasn't competitive with them at all. And but I was never on the traveling team for tennis.
Well, mentioning ping pong, and I'll show this shirt again because this
Yeah,
is the Spirits of St. Louis.
yeah,
This is the
absolutely.
professional team that I worked for back in 74 through 76. And because Tom was back home at that time, got him to come to a game and became the second most avid fan
Right.
of the Spirits.
I did, and
Um, and
still am. Yeah.
for many years, you and I would only converse about that. If I tried to
Right,
bring up
right,
anything else, I got silence. But if I mentioned Goo Kennedy or some other member of the Spirits,
Yep.
I could get a response from you. But I'll tell you a story
Yeah.
involving ping pong and the Spirits because
Okay.
it seems apropos.
Okay.
In the first year, we had an exhibition game that was held in Hannibal, Missouri, and so I was allowed to go on the exhibition games both in
Hmm.
the first year and the second year, but I never traveled with the team otherwise. I did all the home games. So we took a bus up to Hannibal, checked into the Holodome, and they got rooms for the players so they could take a nap, but no rooms for the
No.
statisticians. So we're hanging around in the Holodome, and
Really?
and there's a ping pong table there. So we're playing ping pong, and lo and behold, Maurice Lucas challenges me to a game.
Wow.
And so,
I
if
think you
those
should
of you
tell
don't
people that he's
remember,
the most, yeah, you should tell how fearsome he is.
he was a fearsome competitor. He was 6'9", rookie from Marquette, who went on to win a championship with the Portland
Yeah.
Trailblazers. He was a phenomenal player,
Yeah.
tough competitive player, but he took me on in ping pong, and we had a pretty good match. But I ended up losing 21-19,
Wow.
and I blamed it on his superior reach.
It's very,
It's hard to get one
yeah,
past him.
couldn't get past them. Yep, absolutely.
I'm going to tell a few little stories of our
Okay.
friendship, some of which I've retold to people over the years because I think they're pretty funny. All right, one of them is that you and I were having lunch at a restaurant in Clayton called the Lettuce Leaf, which was ahead of its time, trying to advocate salads over the more traditional cuisine. But nonetheless, when we were there, you ordered a sandwich, and the sandwich was very small, and they after they delivered it, the waiter came out to check on everything was all right. And your line to the waiter was, "You may bring out the other half of my sandwich now."
That
I've used
wasn't
that
very
line
nice of
many a
me.
time since then, so I thank you for that. I'm also going to tell a story that you used to tell. Maybe you can relate the
Yeah.
story if you remember it. It was about a friend of yours who had gone to a fancy French restaurant and you remember the story with
I
that?
think yes, yes.
You
Well,
want to tell it?
well, it was a story that somebody told me.
Okay.
So, and I wasn't there. So that we can embellish it all we want.
Yes, sure. Why don't
And
you tell the
so
story?
it's a fellow who went to a very fancy restaurant in New York on an expense account. And he was a lawyer, I'm sure, and doing work for a client. And at the end of the dinner, the very pretentious French waiter, gave him the bill, and the bill was outrageous. And the young lawyer was just couldn't believe it. And so he gave him the credit card, and the credit card it didn't work. Or the fellow came back and said, "I'm sorry, that credit card does not work." So he gave him a second credit card, and that credit card did not work. And so finally, the guy gave him the Batman card, and the waiter said, "I'm sorry, sir, we do not take the Batman." And that was the story. I don't know if that story is true. I don't know how we ended up paying for the dinner, but I'm sorry, sir, we do not take the Batman credit card.
Story. I've told that story at least
Is
a
that
dozen times.
okay? Yeah, we do not
Um,
take the Batman.
we mentioned Steak and Shake, which was a favorite of yours back in
Yes,
St. Louis.
absolutely.
And what I remember about your order, it was very particular. It was a double cheeseburger with ketchup only.
Ketchup only.
And I would say
Absolutely.
to you, why do you order it with ketchup? There's ketchup on the table. And you said ketchup is better when it's applied back in the kitchen.
Absolutely. Everybody knows that. If you put it on afterwards, it doesn't have the same chance to seep in. It's not as good.
All right, here's another one. We used to play cards together a
Yeah.
lot back in
Yeah.
the high school
Yeah.
days, and you knew a little bit about bridge. I don't think bridge was your strong game,
Yeah.
but we would play sometimes.
Yeah.
And we were playing one time and with Arnold and Tim and you probably, and at some point Arnold said, "Well, I'm going to put on a squeeze," and you said, "You cannot put on a squeeze. I don't know what it is.
Don't try to squeeze me.
Don't squeeze me. You can't." Right.
You can't.
And all right, my final story is about you made a reference to
Yeah.
the basement ping pong, but
Yeah.
we had on earlier as a
Yeah.
podcast guest our classmate Nick Adzik, now
Yeah.
known as Scott Adzik, and he and you played in the finals of the CI Triple T, the Clayton
Yeah.
Invitational Table Tennis Tournament held in my basement.
Yeah.
And it was a 16 person double elimination tournament, culminating in the final between you and Nick. And my claim to fame was that I broadcast that live on KFR radio, which consisted mostly of background noise of the ball going, but I must have had a few clever remarks to
I'm
make
sure you
about that. But
did.
you prevailed over Nick. Do you
Yeah.
remember what the score was?
I don't, so it was double elimination. That I don't remember. So Nick had lost to somebody else, I
Well, you may have
guess.
had to beat him twice.
Maybe I beat him twice. I didn't
Yeah.
remember that it was double elimination. I know it was close. And it upset me that ping pong was by far my best and only sport. And for Nick, it was probably his 23rd sport. Name 20 sports that you're good at, and ping pong wouldn't have been one of them.
Right. You just could pick it up and be
Just
good
pick
at
it
it.
up. But
So before we wrap up, is there anything
yeah.
else that you'd wanted to bring up or mention that we didn't cover?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the CI Triple T because that was a highlight. Um, the Spirits, always have very, fond memories of going to Spirits games and, going to see a professional basketball game and watching Marvin Barnes and Julius Erving with 300 people, in the stands. And I think you told the story. You have a story of might have been an Easter Sunday when they announced the crowd at 412 people and you counted and there were like 26 people in the audience or
Right, right.
something. And that they were fudging the figures a little bit. But
I think my favorite memory of all the great Spirits memories of being in the midst of the action was with Hubie Brown. He was my favorite coach. I got
yeah,
to sit right next to the
yeah,
away coach, so I got to see them all. But Hubie was my favorite. He always seemed to be really good with his team, and I could
yeah,
see him in the huddle and Edlib's magnetic board and what he would say to the
yeah.
team. And I thought it was great. But during one of these, I don't know if you were at that double overtime game that was an incredible game in which at one point, they lost track of the 24-second
Okay.
clock and the Spirits had scored, but then they waved it off and Rod
I don't
Thorne
remember
went
that.
nuts. Or, but in any case, at this point, in the middle of this game, this hectic double overtime game, Hubie comes over to the scorers table and says to us, "This is a hell of a game. I'd pay to get in to see this."
Oh, is he's still doing or he at least as
No,
of
he
last
retired
season, he
finally.
retired?
He's not doing
Okay.
broadcasts, but he had been
Okay.
doing them up to like I think he's in his 90s now.
Yeah,
So
he was really good
he
as
was
even as
great.
yeah, as
The
an
ABA was a
announcer.
wonderful thing that we got to experience. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
got to be there
Yeah.
for that with me, and we always will remember it fondly.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Well, Tom,
if
thanks for being my guest today.
thank you for having
Really
me.
appreciate
And
it. Appreciate our friendship, and I look
you
forward to
too.
seeing you in California
See you
next
in
month.
California soon. Good. Come on out.